It's time to have an honest conversation about the Baltimore Ravens. We talk about that and so much more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens. We're your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. And I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, coming to you from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes video form, on YouTube, audio form, wherever you get your shows. We're 5 days a week here on Locked On Ravens, plus bonus content. So be sure to subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. Subscribe in video form. Hit that like button on YouTube. It all helps out a ton. Thank you so much, whether you're in every day or you listen every single day. If it's your first time in, welcome into the channel. And if you're somewhere in the middle, you see yourself coming back to the channel here and there, the subscribe button, it's there. It's free. I'd really appreciate it if you hit that. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We've been doing this show here, at least I have, since August of 2019. It's been a really fun ride, a fun journey. We bring you news, analysis, updates, and so much more here. Again, 5 days per week. So for daily Ravens coverage, be sure to keep it Locked On Ravens. Unfortunately for the Ravens, they will not be playing in the Super Bowl. As we know, they lost in the AFC Championship game to the Kansas City Chiefs. And I think today, we're a week out from that game. We've talked a lot about really a lot just when it comes to the game itself, the coaching changes and everything that comes along with that. But I think we can just take a step back for a second. And really, we saw Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh speak to the media on Friday, their end of season press conference. I think an honest conversation would just be good for everybody at this point. And look, I come up here, I talk about this team, and I have said it before. I will praise when there is praise to be given out, and I will criticize when there's criticism to be given out. It goes both ways. But I think at some point we do have to let go a little bit from the championship loss. Not that it makes it any less important or anything, but I don't want to necessarily just continue to talk about it. Because at some point I think we have to move on to the offseason and say, you know what, this happened. But I do want to round out what happened really over the course of this week's episode. It might not even take the whole week, honestly. And then we'll start to move into, our mock draft Mondays, mock draft Sundays, the whole 9 yards there. But I think a conversation does have to be had. So I'm going to have that with you today. The first segment might move on to the second segment as well. We'll talk about what needs to change for this team. And then we'll talk about the coaching changes that have happened with this team and continue to happen for this team. So let's get right into the conversation here. I think for the Baltimore Ravens, you have to look at a couple of things. And from a goal perspective, you have to look at a couple of things. First of all, if you're an NFL franchise, what is your goal? What is your goal when it comes to what you want to achieve at the NFL level? Super Bowls, right? You want to win. In any NFL franchise, what the goal is for that team is to win. But not win in the regular season, win in the playoffs, win those Super Bowls. And Baltimore has been a very historically successful franchise. Obviously, since coming into the league in 1996, the Ravens did won their first one in 2000, their second one in 2012, 2013. So obviously the 12-year window would make it actually next year they would win it. But regardless, John Harbaugh's tenure started off with a bang, right? A bunch of, whether you talk about AFC Championship appearances, divisionals, this, that, and the other, the Joe Flacco, John Harbaugh tandem. Now, I understand, and I say, look, John Harbaugh, if you put him out on the open market and you said every team doesn't have a coach, John Harbaugh is getting a job, and he's getting a job pretty quickly. But to me, the whole notion of, just fire John Harbaugh, and I think it's both sides of it. Where, look, you can't just say fire John Harbaugh no matter what when you realize that he took the team to the AFC Championship game. When that happened, and I've been consistent with saying this, when that happened, when John Harbaugh took that step forward, because look, it wasn't the step that everybody wanted. It wasn't the step I wanted, but it was a step in the right direction. When that happened, whether you were on the side of firing John Harbaugh or not, they were never going to move on from him. But to me, you can't sit and just look at John Harbaugh's playoff records since the Super Bowl, what the Ravens have done since the Super Bowl. You can't look at it and I think be okay with it, right? John Harbaugh will just go through every year. after the Super Bowl, did not make the playoffs, lost in the divisional round, did not make the playoffs, didn't make the playoffs, didn't make the playoffs, lost in the wild card round, lost in the divisional round, lost in the divisional round, didn't make the playoffs, lost in the wild card round, and lost in the AFC Championship game. So that is, I believe, if I'm doing the math right, 3 playoff wins since the Ravens last won the Super Bowl 11 years ago. And to me, you can talk about regular season success, and that's part of what gets you to the playoffs. But sometimes things have to change. And I'm not saying, I'm not saying fire John Harbaugh, fire John. That's not the route I'm going down. But I also understand that you cannot continue to be complacent if you're the Ravens. And what would have been complacent is if they had lost in the divisional round again or lost in the wild card round again. But I also understand that John Harbaugh and Todd Monken, and you talk about the lack of a run game in that AFC Championship game, and John Harbaugh saying, well, we wanted to run it, but they just gave us heavy looks, and we could have done this in those heavy looks, but we didn't do it. That's not an excuse to me, right? And I know John Harbaugh said, people don't want to hear it, but we did want to run the ball. But having 16 carries in an AFC Championship game in the biggest moment here, having a situation where you give 6 carries to running backs, and then it's the same conversation where in 2019 they got away from their identity in that Tennessee game early because they got punched in the mouth and they lost. Even a game, like it's happened other times, but in 2023, that Cleveland game, Keaton Mitchell got 4 carries the entire game after absolutely burning up the field and doing incredible stuff with his first couple of touches. And John Harbaugh said, well, that's just the way the game went. 2019, he said, that's just the way the game went. Even after the championship game said, well, that's just the way the game went. This cannot continue to keep happening if you're the Ravens. We're having an honest conversation here. I think John Harbaugh, again, I will say it, he's a good coach for an NFL team, right? If John Harbaugh was all 32 teams didn't have a coach, John Harbaugh would get a job. But this cannot continue to happen. The Ravens had such high expectations for how good they were, and the reason they lost, and I'm not trying to blame one thing on just why they lost this game, but a big reason was because the Ravens got away from who they were again because they got scared again. And you cannot have that. And you can't have a team like this. This was their best shot to win in the Lamar Jackson era, probably even far before the Lamar Jackson era in terms of how good this team was. It was a historically good team, top 2, top 5 in multiple different metrics all time, or 2000s. There were a bunch of advanced analytics that supported that. And the Ravens couldn't even make it to the Super Bowl, let alone win it. So that, to me, I think is what's frustrating for a lot of Ravens fans. And when it comes to John Harbaugh and having that John Harbaugh conversation, players want to play for John Harbaugh. John Harbaugh puts together great coaching staffs. John Harbaugh himself still has a lot of great qualities as a coach. But you can't continue doing this, right? You can't keep coming up short for a team that has such high expectations every year, that has the roster that they have, that has Lamar Jackson. And I get, look, it's not all John Harbaugh, right? Lamar Jackson, if you're talking about the championship game, he didn't play well enough, which we'll get to in the second part of the show. He did not play well enough. But you at least need to give your team a chance by running the football. That game, they were down by 10 points or 7 points from the majority of that game. They played like they were down 30. You can say Todd Monken calls the plays, but John Harbaugh's the head man, and he's the guy that can say, hey, we really need to run the ball more. And I thought that for me, it doesn't sit right that we continue to have this conversation. And, maybe next year is the year it changes. But if it doesn't, then we have to have another honest conversation. I've had these honest conversations about the Ravens episodes ever since I started doing this back in 2019. So I'd like to stop having them and just say, hey, look, the Ravens won the Super Bowl. And I know it's not that easy, but the way that the season went, the health was really good for them for the most part in terms of not losing guys to season-ending injuries. They were dominant on defense for the majority of the year, including in that AFC Championship game. And the offense found its stride, but they still came up short. And when you talk about, well, the head coach gets all the blame, I mean, look, deserved or not, that's part of the job description, unfortunately. And John Harbaugh is getting it right now. And you look all across, whether it's local media, national media, and people still a week later are flabbergasted at how this Ravens team that was top 1, top 5 in almost every rushing metric there is for the season, went away from who they were and ultimately, again, played scared at the end of the day there. So coming up in the second part of the show, we'll talk more about what needs to change for this Ravens team, Lamar Jackson, and more. Stay tuned. A lot to get to here on Locked On Ravens. First, this episode is brought to you by DoorDash. I'm a big food guy personally, and I like a bunch of different foods. And this for football, whether it's the game day package like pizza, wings, soda, burgers, or even just buns, or even the snack package. You got chips, dips, nachos, everything you need to make your own nachos. You can get it all delivered on DoorDash without missing the game. And sometimes when I'm watching a game, if the game goes to timeout or it's halftime or the 2-minute warning, that's my cue to order in with DoorDash. Really, whenever the game clock stops, that's when I know it's time to order in with DoorDash. There are plenty of solid options here in the Baltimore area where I am right now, whether you want some pizza with underground pizza or you want some sushi hana for sushi. DoorDash has so many different options. You can get 50% off of a $10 buy when you spend $15 or more on your first order. Well, you now have the DoorDash app and enter code LOCK23, separate exchange terms apply. Again, 50% off the $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCK23, separate exchange terms apply. You can get prepared before game day, stock up on your favorite appetizers and order all your tailgate gear on DoorDash, then get ready to watch your team win. One more time, don't forget to use the code LOCK23 for 50% off up to $10 value when you first order it out of the DoorDash app and spend $15 or more, separate exchange terms apply. And this episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up to peak performance from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts, your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need, all the prices you want. It's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible as well as exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We're back. Our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here, having an honest conversation about this Baltimore Ravens team. And look, I know that there has been a lot that's going on for the Ravens over this past year, 2 years, 3. You can go back as far as you want to, right? A lot of things happen to a lot of different teams. But for this Ravens team, I think the frustration, obviously for the fans, has begun to mount a little bit. And look, I think it's frustrating when you had a team like you did in the Ravens in 2023, and you don't win the big game. And then look, in a span of 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, you see coaches walk out the door one by one by one by one. And you're kind of worried the same thing might happen in free agency with the players. So in terms of what needs to change, continuing our honest conversation here, just logistical things. I mean, seriously, when it comes to coaching, to playing, I mean, it's not just all in the coaches, it's not just all in the players. But when you talk about Lamar, he has proven that he is one of the best players in the game, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. But when he is needed in the playoffs, he's needed from the Ravens in so many different ways in the playoffs. It just has not been up to the level that they've needed it. And he has not played the way that they've needed to. Now, in some of those other games, the Tennessee game, he had over 500 yards of total offense, but had a bunch of drops by his receivers and all that stuff. And, there are circumstances, but overall, you look at Lamar's playoff track record overall has not been that way. Lamar is playing at the highest level of his career this season. I guess the AFC Championship game and everything just kind of falls apart for him. Maybe it was just him being first-time AFC Championship goer. You can go up against a guy in Patrick Mahomes who has been there, done that, has no pressure on him anymore. I do think Lamar forced things. What has to change with Lamar is he just has to play his game all the time. Lamar likes being a quarterback, and he's a good quarterback. He can throw the ball. I've been on the Lamar can throw the ball train since he was in college at Louisville. You can't question me and how I believe in Lamar as a thrower, because I do. He's improved in that aspect, and he's improved in every aspect, just like every quarterback. Every quarterback improves throwing in the NFL at the NFL level. Every NFL quarterback improves at the NFL level. It's not just a Lamar thing. But to me, there are some aspects he can improve still, right? The deep ball definitely has to get better. I think that has kind of fallen off. It wasn't top 5 in the league to begin with, but I think it was in the middle of the pack early in his career, and this has kind of fallen off a cliff these past couple of seasons. But I think Lamar, and he won't admit this, in my heart, and I've kind of said this before on this show, I feel like he has tried to mold this perception of himself, and part of it is because of the outside noise. where we saw in this AFC Championship game, there were multiple lanes to run and multiple lanes to pick up yards for a first down. But Lamar, again, he likes to throw the ball over running it, which is fine. I get it. He's a quarterback. He should love to throw the ball, which he does. But to me, I think sometimes he doesn't let the game dictate his play. He tries to let what he wants to do dictate the game, and that doesn't always work because sometimes guys just aren't open, and you have that 10 yards of green grass to run. You just got to run the ball, right? It's not about him, all these narratives of, oh, he's a running back and he can't throw and this, that, and the other. None of that's true, right? None of it's true. If people are still saying that today in 2024, it's an old take. It's a lazy take. Some of those takes never even existed to begin with. They weren't even true to begin with. In fact, a lot of those weren't true to begin with. If we're being honest, he was never a running back. He never couldn't throw. But to me, I feel like with Lamar, just taking what's there and playing his game, if he doesn't force a ball into somebody and instead takes 8 yards of grass, right? Even an 8-yard gain as opposed to an incompletion, whether it's on a first down, a second down, whatever, that dictates the game. So for Lamar, just trusting himself. I mean, he believes in himself. He knows what he can do. And he's somebody that has all the talent in the world. But to me, I just think sometimes he prefers to throw over run because of the perception of himself. And I don't think he lets the perception necessarily impact him in the ways that people are saying it does. But there have been times when I've said, hey, look, he just had to throw it here instead of run it. He just had to run it here instead of throw it. And sometimes he does the opposite of what, and look, I'm watching these games, right? I'm not Lamar on the field. I'm not an NFL quarterback. So obviously Lamar, he has to make those decisions. I don't make those decisions for him. You don't make those decisions for him. He makes those decisions. But to me, that's kind of where I've looked with Lamar sometimes. And this isn't just a this year thing. That's just an AFC Championship thing. I've noticed it before. But Lamar's been very vocal about, hey, you know what? I'm a quarterback. I want to throw the ball. And that's what I'm going to do. And look, he does it. He's good at it. And he should throw the ball. I want him to throw the ball. But when there's nobody open and there's grass in front of you, I would love it if he took the grass. I think his coaches and teammates would love it if he took the grass. So Odell was talking to him and trying to hype him up and say, look, we know you can do this with your legs. You're so dynamic when you do that. You change the game with that. That wasn't Odell saying, don't throw the ball again, Lamar. We can't trust you to throw. That's not what he was saying at all. He was saying, just play your game. Just do your thing. Feel the game out and get into a rhythm. And I feel like if Lamar does that, that to me is where it is. So this is not necessarily a criticism of Lamar in terms of, oh, well, he's so bad at this. He needs to get better at it. Why isn't he doing it? This is me just, in terms of where I feel like Lamar can improve. It's just feeling out the game more. That's it. I think he has a good feel for the game already, but it would just make him so much more dangerous and so much more dynamic if instead of running here, he threw there, or throwing here, he ran there. I think it would open up a lot more things for him. And not that he doesn't do it for the entire season, but sometimes maybe he gets in his head a little bit or the game isn't going the way he wants. And I just feel like there's so much good to Lamar. He's going to win the MVP. He is a heck of a quarterback, both throwing and running the ball, by the way. And he proved that he was the best quarterback in the NFL this season. He played like the best quarterback in the NFL this season, but no one's perfect, right? Mahomes isn't perfect. Allen isn't perfect. Burrow, Hurts, no one. And that includes Lamar. No one is perfect. There are always areas to improve. I think if Lamar can take that next step, I mean, that's part of it. The deep ball and feeling the game out. Those to me, I think the decision-making has gotten better. I think a lot of things have gotten better for Lamar. But, for a lot of different aspects of things, any player, any quarterback can improve. And again, Lamar's included in those conversations. Coming up in the final part of the show, we will talk and kind of round out Giannis' conversation about the Ravens, plus get into more Baltimore Ravens coaches leaving. Stay tuned. A lot to get to on the show. First, this show is sponsored by FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. I'm a big Super Bowl guy. Obviously, I wish the Ravens were in it. That would make me an even bigger Super Bowl guy. But the game is still good, right? I'm going to be watching the game and, eating some food, watching the commercials. And for me, I've kind of said it before, the bet that I like is Christian McCaffrey overs, anytimes, anything over you can get there on FanDuel, because if the 49ers run the ball, as I've said, unlike a certain AFC team in the AFC Championship against the Kansas City Chiefs, very porous run defense, I think it's a recipe for success for the 49ers. So McCaffrey anytime touchdown, McCaffrey over yards. I'm taking that. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season on W or maybe 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who won the Super Bowl in that Super Bowl 58 game, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers order today, you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make everyone more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We're back, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Monday. Thanks so much again for tuning in. If you like the content, you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe on YouTube, subscribe in audio form as well. Same show, audio and video. So if you want to subscribe and watch on YouTube one day and also subscribe and listen in audio form, you can do exactly that. I'm also trying to start on my Instagram again. We're posting on there regularly now. So if you want to follow me over at Chaosstriker34 on that, same as my Twitter handle, you can see on YouTube in the box to the left there. Let's round out our conversation, though. I mean, again, a lot of this stuff for the Ravens, a lot of stuff has to do with it, right? I think John Harbaugh, him just not having his guys ready to play in big moments. I mean, look, the Chiefs were ready to play, but we can't continuously say for John Harbaugh, oh, John Harbaugh got out coached in the biggest moment of the Ravens season again, and the Ravens lost, and that's their season. We cannot continuously say that about John Harbaugh, especially for a guy. It'd be one thing, like, let's just throw Mike Macdonald back in the equation quickly, right? It's one thing if it was Mike Macdonald, his first or second or third season, right? You know, first big moment for him. Oh, he got out coached by Andy Reid. Let's just say Andy Reid. Got out coached by Andy Reid. You can't say, oh, okay, fine. Macdonald has to get fired because first big moment, he got out coached by a veteran who's been there and is multiple Super Bowl champion. Can't have that, right? But for John Harbaugh, it's different. He's been in big moments. He's won in big moments. And here we are, every single season, essentially, since the Super Bowl, saying, oh, he got out coached in this big moment. He didn't have his guys ready in that big moment. It's not all on him, but it's honestly becoming less and less acceptable that we say it. In fact, it's not acceptable, right, that we say that, where you have a team like they did this year with the Ravens and you lose that. It all falls down on the head man, and I think a lot of it is rightfully deserved for John Harbaugh. And he'll tell you, too, that, you know, they missed an opportunity. They didn't get the job done, but I think the overwhelming consensus from the fan base on what John Harbaugh had to say about the lack of a run game and all of that, it wasn't good enough for the fans that were listening to that. And part of his stuff, again, was, well, we could have run this, but we didn't. That's not something that fans want to hear. It's not something that I think should be a mindset at all, right? If you can run in heavy personnel with how good you were as a running team, you do it. Right? You do it. That was what got you there, and you went away from what got you there. And again, as I said in the first part of the show, you can blame Todd Monken and say, oh, well, he was calling the plays. John Harbaugh has override ability. John Harbaugh's the head coach, and we've said that about him for the last 16 seasons. He earned that job. He won a Super Bowl, but we can acknowledge that post-Super Bowl, the playoff success that this Ravens team should have had has not been there, right? You can have some excuses for years in between, like injuries, younger teams, building back up. But here we are now in the midst of this whole thing. Your defense, you have guys like Justin Madubuike and Patrick Queen on rookie contracts. You have bargain deals for guys like Arthur Millette, Jadeveon Clowney, Kyle Van Noy, Nelson Aguilar. The list goes on and on and on and on there. And you can't get the job done. And part of it is because you move away from your identity. And it's something that we've seen before. Greg Roman got a lot of blame, and rightfully so. But it was the same story in the 2019 playoff game that it was in 2023. Not exactly, but it just, again, it's not acceptable here. And I understand the reasoning behind the Ravens keeping John Harbaugh for 2024. It's because he took a step forward, right? He led that team to one of the best records in the NFL. I think it was the best record in the NFL. At least I think it was, or at least it was tied for it. And then you give them a push in the right direction, a step in the right direction, where they end up making the AFC Championship game, something they hadn't done since they won the Super Bowl. But with every year that this thing doesn't work out, it's another year of Lamar's prime wasted, another year of all these other players' careers wasted. And, you know, at some point with the Belichicks and the Tomlins and the Harbaughs, with the lack of playoff success, something has to give. Not saying those guys aren't good coaches or don't, deserve another opportunity in the NFL. And I'm not even saying, I'm not going back to that. I'm not just a guy who's ringing the bell like, oh, fire John Harbaugh. That's not what I'm doing. But I think that, again, if we have to have this conversation again next year, it becomes a whole different conversation, right? Because there's no more taking a step forward. If they make the Super Bowl next year, again, you don't fire a coach that makes the Super Bowl, right? I think that's something. But even if it's another AFC Championship loss, Lamar at the end of that season will be 28 years old. He would have just turned 28 years old, and you're really starting to play with fire in terms of what is and isn't complacency. I think it already is kind of complacency, although they did take that step forward. And in terms of Lamar, again, just for him, stepping up in the playoffs and not kind of psyching himself out of playing his game. I think that, to me, will have him, he's already playing at such a high level right now, and I love Lamar. I have a lot of respect for Lamar and everything that he does. It's been incredible watching him grow, and I think that he has still so much room to be able to improve his game, and that's a scary thought, right? He thought he played well this year. I think he can play even better next year, and I'm really excited for Lamar. But again, it's just not psyching himself out of the game that I know that he can play, and so many others know that he can play too. So again, Baltimore's in a tough spot right now. It's rough. They lost a championship game, but it kind of feels good to have an honest conversation about everything here, where not everything falls on one person. And again, you acknowledge they had a great season. There was a lot of things that went right for them. John Harbaugh had that locker room dancing. Lamar was playing scorching pace, right? He's going to win that MVP here coming up. But again, you look at the season as a whole, very successful season in a lot of different ways. And I'm going to look back on this season, especially the regular season, right, with a lot of fond memories from that regular season. But once you hit the playoffs, I mean, look, it's not what you wanted. And that is why it's considered, and I consider it, a failure, unfortunately. But it doesn't mean they're done. Doesn't mean their window's over. It doesn't mean they're never going to get back there and win again. They certainly can. But things do have to change. It's going to be interesting to see how the free agency outlook is for this team, how Zach Orr ends up, going through things. Eric DeCosta spoke at the press conference on Friday, said he's going to have some decisions to make with Rashad Bateman, always fifth-year options. So there's a lot there. But all seasons that end this way, they're hard, right? It's hard, and circumstances make some harder than others. And I think for a lot of Ravens fans, myself included, this one was just, it still is really, really tough to swallow. It really, really stings in a lot of different ways. And part of that is because the coaches are leaving. We saw Mike McDonald go to the Seahawks as their head coach. That stung for a lot of people. You almost see Zach Orr follow him according to reports, but he does stay in Baltimore and is the Ravens' new defensive coordinator. But then you have Denard Wilson going to Tennessee as a defensive coordinator. Anthony Weaver over the weekend went to Miami as their defensive coordinator. Joel Ortiz gone to Los Angeles to be their general manager. And then you also have guys like Mike Devlin, who went to Los Angeles to be on Jim Harbaugh's staff, which also was going to include Greg Roman, by the way. So nice little former Raven reunion over there for Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh, who did work together in San Francisco. That's forgotten, did work together in San Francisco. But at this point, the big question, and again, why it stings for so many people, is because that defensive coaching staff was insane, incredible last year. And we're going to see what ends up happening. But at this point, I don't necessarily know how Zach Orr's going to fare as defensive coordinator. I really like the hire. I think it's a great hire. But he's never called plays before, and John Harbaugh said at his end-of-season press conference, something you got to work through. There are going to be some growing pains, which I agree with, and we're going to see how it all pans out for him. So tough way. Again, it's so tough the way their season ended. And look, if Zay Flowers scores on that touchdown, doesn't dive in the end zone the way he did and scores, and the Ravens win that game, we're having a different conversation now, right? The Ravens are in the Super Bowl and everything is Zay okay, right? Or maybe Zay doesn't have that taunting penalty, or Lamar doesn't do that interception in triple coverage, right? A lot of mistakes throughout the game, a holding penalty here, roughing the passer penalty there. Wasn't just on Harbaugh, wasn't just on Monk, it wasn't just on Lamar. Everybody plays a role in it. Everybody is to blame, some more than others. But the fact of the matter is we're not talking about that, right? Talk about woulda, coulda, shouldas. None of that happened, unfortunately. The Ravens lost that game, and again, we're going to start slowly moving on to the offseason here as we continue to wrap up. We didn't really have a chance to wrap up last week because so many coaching changes were happening on the staff. I do so many episodes about that, but we're creeping up on starter free agency, just about a month and a week away. So we'll be diving into free agency previews. We'll start to do mock draft Sundays. Still really exciting on Locked On Ravens. Be sure to subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. Like the video, really does help out a lot. Really appreciate all the support. Follow along in audio form as well. Thanks so much for tuning in today to Locked On Ravens. Follow me on Instagram, on Twitter, on social media at ChaosStriker34. Coming up tomorrow, more Ravens content, of course. So be sure to stay tuned. That we'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.